Hello, this is Elizabeth Ortel, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the Wednesday, April 8th issue of the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. From the front page, back from the brink. Trump relents as U.S. Iran agreed to 2-week ceasefire, reopening strait. U.S. President Donald Trump pulled back on his threats to launch devastating strikes on Iran late Tuesday, swerving to de-escalate the war less than 2 hours before the deadline he set for Tehran to capitulate to a deal. Trump said he was holding off on his threatened attacks on Iranian bridges and power plants as the U.S. and Iran agreed to a 2-week ceasefire that includes the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. He said Iran has proposed a workable 10-point peace plan that could help end the war launched by the U.S. and Israel in February. Iran's Supreme National Security Council said it has accepted the ceasefire and that it would negotiate with the United States in Islamabad beginning Friday. Neither Iran nor the United States said when the ceasefire would begin, and attacks took place in Israel, Iran, and across the Gulf region early Wednesday. Israel has also agreed to the ceasefire, according to a White House official who was not authorized to comment publicly and spoke on condition of anonymity. The ceasefire calls for Israel and Hezbollah to halt fighting in Lebanon, according to the Prime Minister of Pakistan, which has been mediating talks. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said passage through the state would be allowed under Iranian military management. It wasn't immediately clear whether that meant Iran could completely loosen its chokehold on the waterway. The plan allows for both Iran and Oman to charge fees on ships transiting through the strait, according to a regional official who spoke on condition of anonymity to discuss negotiations they were directly involved in. The official said Iran would use the money it raised for reconstruction. In addition to control of the strait, Iran's demands for ending the war include withdrawal of U.S. combat forces from the region, the lifting of sanctions, and the release of its frozen assets. Since the war began, Trump has repeatedly backed off deadlines just before they expire. In doing so Tuesday, Trump said in a social media post he had come to the decision based on conversations with Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif and General Asim Munir, Pakistan's powerful army chief. Sharif, in a post on X hours earlier, urged Trump to extend his deadline by 2 weeks to allow diplomacy to advance. He used the same post to ask Iran to open the straits for 2 weeks. Almost all of the various points of past contention have been agreed to between the United States and Iran, but a 2-week period will allow the agreement to be finalized and consummated, Trump said. There are concerns in Israel about the agreement, according to a person familiar with the situation who spoke on condition of anonymity because they were not allowed to speak to the media. The person said Israel would like to achieve more. Iran's stockpile of highly enriched uranium is still buried at enrichment sites. The program had been one of the main issues cited by both Israel and the U.S. launching the war. A whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again, if a deal isn't reached, Trump had said in an online post Tuesday morning. But he also seemed to keep open the possibility of an off-ramp, saying that maybe something revolutionarily wonderful can happen. Trump's expansive threat did not seem to account for potential harm to civilians, prompting Democrats in Congress, some United Nations officials, and scholars in military law to say such strikes would violate international law. Tehran's representative at the UN, Amir Saeed Iravani, said the threats constitute incitement to war crimes and potentially genocide. and that Iran would take immediate and proportionate reciprocal measures if Trump launched devastating strikes. The U.S. and Israel have battered Iran with attacks targeting its military capabilities, leadership, and nuclear program. Iran has responded with a stream of strikes on Israel and Gulf Arab neighbors, causing regional chaos and outsized economic and political shock. China, which is Tehran's biggest trade partner, encouraged the Iranians to find a way to a ceasefire as talks progressed, according to two officials who were not authorized to comment publicly, and spoke on condition of anonymity. Before the deadline, airstrikes hit two bridges and a train station, and the U.S. hit military infrastructure on Karg Island, a key hub for Iranian oil production. While Iran cannot match the sophistication of U.S. and Israeli weaponry or their dominance in the air, its chokehold on the strait since the war began in late February is roiling the world economy and raising the pressure on Trump both at home and abroad to find a way out of the standoff. Even as the ceasefire was announced, missile alerts continued in the United Arab Emirates, Israel, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, and Kuwait early Wednesday morning, hinting at the chaos surrounding the diplomatic moves. A gas processing facility in Abu Dhabi was ablaze after incoming Iranian fire. Israel was continuing its attacks on Iran, said an Israeli military official who spoke on condition of anonymity in line with military regulations. Iran also kept up fire on Israel. The U.S. military has halted all offensive operations against Iran, but continues defensive actions, said an official who spoke on condition of anonymity to describe sensitive military operations. Earlier Tuesday, the Israeli military said it attacked an Iranian petrochemical site in Shiraz. The second day in a row it hit such a facility. The military later said it also struck bridges in several cities that were being used by Iranian forces to transport weapons and military equipment. More than 1,900 people have been killed in Iran since the war began, but the government has not updated the toll for days. In Lebanon, where Israel is fighting Iran-backed Hezbollah militants, more than 1,500 people have been killed and more than 1 million people have been displaced. 11 Israeli soldiers have died. In Gulf Arab states and the occupied West Bank, more than 24 people have died, while 23 have been reported dead in Israel and 13 U.S. service members have been killed. Front page of the Toronto Star, Education. TDSB change affects model schools. Board will no longer allocate extra staff to areas with greater socio-economic need. Toronto's Public School Board is ending a long-time practice of weighing socio-economic factors when staffing schools, a shift some worry will reduce supports in the city's most disadvantaged communities. The Toronto District School Board, currently under provisional supervision, is moving to a staffing model for 2026-27 based on enrollment, class size requirements, and union agreements, no longer factoring in higher needs schools that previously received additional staffing support. That information comes from a recent TDSB presentation, which suggested as many as 600 teaching positions system-wide were on the line, prompting unions to sound the alarm. But a board spokesperson said Tuesday that based on the projected enrollment of 5,000 fewer students next year, the TDSB anticipates 289 fewer teaching positions across elementary and secondary schools. The vast majority of job reductions, if not all, are expected to be through attrition. Every spring, the TTSB goes through a process to determine how staff are placed in schools for the upcoming year, said Ryan Bird, noting that planning helps ensure schools have the staff required to support students. It's important to note that staffing continues to fluctuate right up until the new school year, so these numbers are not yet final. He said it's unclear how many of the 289 teaching positions will be lost at higher needs schools where staffing has been based on smaller class sizes, though presentation slide decks suggest 175 positions overall. In future, the same staffing metrics will be applied across all schools, signaling a major shift. The TDSB has long used a school ranking system called the Learning Opportunities Index that considers factors such as household income, reliance on social assistance, parental education, and single-parent families to identify where students face greater challenges and direct additional resources, supports, and staff. Schools with the highest need are also referred to as model schools. Helen Victoros, president of the Elementary Teachers of Toronto, said it's super concerning that higher needs schools aren't being given consideration, noting it will affect our most marginalized students. We need more caring adults in our system, not less, to meet the needs, she told the Star. She notes that the TDSB and its predecessor boards before amalgamation has used some variation of a ranking system for more than 50 years, which she called a shining example of the board's commitment to equity and social justice. It's unclear if schools that rank highest in need will also see a reduction in other resources, supports, and money for school budgets. Trustee Alexis Dawson said losing extra staff at high-needs schools is a devastating loss and only widens the gaps between the haves and have-nots. There are clear areas of need in the city, and we aren't doing right by our students in those neighborhoods if we don't have the additional resources to support equity of access to opportunities for all, said Dawson, co-chair of the Inner City Community Advisory Committee, which supported model schools. The committee is currently paused under provincial supervision, which means trustees have no power. Dawson says the Model Schools program is so highly regarded internationally that we would have school boards from across the world come and visit the TDSB to learn about our equity initiatives. So it's shocking to me that this government isn't seeing that bigger picture. Parent Anna Lito says it's so disappointing high-needs schools are no longer considered for extra staffing, saying the move disproportionately affects schools serving disadvantaged communities. She's co-chair of the Parent Council at Roselands Public School. It ranks number 39 on the index and says that school was allocated an additional teacher this year because of its needs, noting many kids come from low-income families and single-parent homes. New immigrants. She worries losing the extra teaching support will result in larger class sizes and less support for kids with behavioral challenges, although the board says it doubts there will be any noticeable change to class sizes. It's really, really disheartening to know that we already have so many challenges, and it's going to be even worse, she said. That was the whole point of the program, to give schools like ours an additional resource to help with the students. I'm so frustrated. I don't even know how to put it into words. She says she's livid that principals system-wide have been told by the board not to consult parent communities on staffing models for next year. It's not surprising because they don't want parents to fight back. They don't want the pushback, she said. Michelle Texiera, president of the Toronto local chapter of the Ontario Secondary School Teachers Federation, said it's shameful these cuts are being made to schools that support our highest need students. In a memo to members Tuesday, she said staffing allocations were prepared by senior management and approved by a provincial supervisor in decisions made behind closed doors with no transparency, rather than debated by trustees with an opportunity for public input. As we move forward this spring, we will continue to push the TTSB for transparency, she wrote in the memo. We will continue to advocate for our members and for students. This will become increasingly important when the TDSB looks to approve a budget that will likely have minimal consultation with stakeholders and will no doubt be approved behind closed doors. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. From the front page, federal politics, a simmering power struggle in the Senate. Down the street from the House of Commons, a parliamentary crisis unfolds. This drama doesn't involve misconduct. The fate of Prime Minister Mark Carney's government doesn't hang in the balance. Most visibly, it's a clash between senators who believe their duty is to act, to fully study government legislation and recommend changes, and others who believe they shouldn't stand in the way of the new government's agenda. In the background, there is an internal power struggle, allegations of a bro culture, and threats by government representatives to fall in line. What may hang in the balance is the future of the Senate's decade-old experience with independence and the relevancy of the chamber of sober second thought. We are in a state of suspended animation, described Alberta Senator Paula Simons. For the past weeks, a heated debate erupted while senators discussed controversial pieces of legislation. The immigration measures in the Liberals' Bill C-12, which critics say breaches international and domestic law, mean vulnerable asylum seekers are denied protection, and Bill C-4, which reversed privacy rights for Canadians, giving political parties carte blanche to do what they please with your data over the Senate's proper role. There's a very significant shift in mood, in vibes, about what it means to be independent, said Manitoba Senator Mary Lou McPherson. There is some kind of massive groupthink that's taken hold. She is among a few dozen senators who pushed back over those bills, but faced a growing cohort who felt it wasn't their place to intervene. Several independent senators are now discussing forming a new group, one that's friendlier to the government. Since Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's 10-year-old reforms, the vast majority of senators have no declared partisan affiliation. Only a dozen conservative senators remain. Many of Trudeau's appointees strongly believe in the mandate he bestowed upon them to restore public trust, represent regional and minority interests, and transform the Senate into a less partisan place. When I spoke to Justin Trudeau, he specifically told me, go be independent, go ask hard questions, push back against the government, Simons recounted. That's why I applied to the Senate, Nova Scotia Senator Colin Deacon told the Star. But now many senators feel the independence project is at risk. In a February speech, Ontario Senator Peter Harder suggested some of his colleagues are activists who were giving into cynicism by casting aspersions on the government's motives and harming the institution by suggesting amendments. The biggest threats to an independent Senate, frankly, are independent senators in our behavior, negotiation, and relationship with the other chamber, Harder said. There is a risk of overplay. I think The reaction of a new government, a minority government, a government that is under tremendous pressure in the circumstances of the moment, would not welcome the upset that some of the senators would have on this and other pieces of legislation, he said. In an interview Tuesday, Harder said he was unaware of the consequences of his speech, but his comments echoed what other senators reported after lobbying efforts by the government's leader in the Senate, former Quebec Liberal Pierre Moreau, and the government House leader Stephen McKinnon, that if the Senate becomes too activist in its pursuit of amendments, it will encourage the government to abandon the independent Senate model and to revert to a partisan Senate, summed up BC Senator Woon Pao Wu. Now, this is, of course, a threat. I mean, there's really no other way to describe it. For months, the Prime Minister's office has refused to say whether Carney plans to continue appointing independent senators. The public portal to solicit applications from Canadians is closed, and vacancies on the Independent Advisory Board are unfilled. No new senator has been appointed. People are treading a little carefully because there is a feeling that if we push back too hard, then the whole reform project could be at risk, Simon said. But at the same time, she said, if we are self-censoring and saying, well, we mustn't overstep for fear that he will remove our independence, then we've removed our independence ourselves. Added Wu, I think if the government is determined to have a more compliant Senate, it will do so whether or not senators curb the enthusiasm for amendments. Under Trudeau, senators frequently passed amendments. They spent 1 year, for example, traveling across the country, studying the government's Impact Assessment Act, Bill C-69. They spent nearly 18 months debating a Bloc Québécois Bill C-282 on supply management, even though it was supported by all the party leaders in the House of Commons. Many senators felt the bill was irresponsible, that it would handcuff the government and harm Canadian interests. Harder, the bill's critic, even urged senators to defeat the bill so it cannot see the light at committee. Tuesday, he said he did so because it was a private member's bill. Like many others, Alberta Senator Scott Tanis believes senators are giving the government a longer leash after a recent election and are adjusting to a public mood where priorities have changed. What's complicating matters is that the Conservatives are towing the government line, making the independents the de facto opposition. To top it off, there is an internal struggle within the largest independent group that could come to blows next Tuesday. And then there is Carney's influence looming in the background. His network runs deep. Those in the club want to remain, those outside want to join. Look at the white, corporate, male, wealthy troika around this prime minister. Their view of the world is very particular. Ontario Senator Bernadette Clement said she's wrestling with her desire to advocate for and defend the rights of vulnerable communities. By becoming a lightning rod for some things, I don't know if that's helpful in the long run, she said. I wish that more people were standing up. Section A2 of the Toronto Star. Opinion. Rosie D'Amato. After the women's 800-meter final at the Rio Olympics in 2016, the medalists who stood on the podium were Caster Semenya of South Africa, Francine Niyonsaba of Burundi, and Margaret Wambu of Kenya. All three were afterward confirmed to be athletes with differences in sexual development, DSD. Through no fault of their own, it wasn't a fair race. Under the new International Olympic Committee policy recently announced on qualification guidelines for the women's category in sports, none would have been permitted to compete as females unless there was medical intervention. DSD and athletes with a diagnosis of complete androgen insensitivity syndrome, CAIS, a condition that occurs when someone is genetically male but doesn't develop external male genitals, may not even realize they're biologically male, is extremely rare. Generally described as intersex, not fitting into the typical binary definition of male or female bodies, born that way. Within the rules now adopted by the IOC, they would be eligible to compete at the Los Angeles Olympics in 2028 in any male category, including in a designated male slot within any mixed category and any open category, or in sports and events that do not classify athletes by sex. They are caught in the political and aesthetic biology of their bodies, as verified by the gene screening test that the IOC has mandated for LA to identify males and females. The genetic test detects the presence or absence of the sex-determining region Y, SRY, gene on the Y chromosome, which triggers male development in utero. Doesn't matter if someone has lived their entire life as female, there is a performance advantage in all sports and events that rely on strength, power, and endurance, as the IOC concluded following a 6-month working committee probe with a wide range of experts in various fields. I would posit that a born with advantage isn't much different from, say, Australian swimmer Ian Thorpe's size 17 feet, or the hypermobility, double-jointedness, often inherited, of American gymnast Simone Biles. But I recognize that's a shaky argument. It is a nuanced area, and for intersex Olympians, it means correction via testosterone-suppressing drugs or even surgery. It strikes me as deplorable to force such extreme remedies on anyone. Two-time gold medalist Semenya outright rejected drug intervention and fought her case all the way to the European Court of Human Rights. But I can't think of a fair and equitable solution for intersex athletes either. Life isn't fair, and they're a teeny number alongside the small number of transgender athletes who will be impacted. Weightlifter Laurel Hubbard was the first openly trans athlete to compete at the Olympics, Tokyo 2021, and she couldn't even make the first lift. It should be noted that the IOC shift received overwhelming support in an IOC online survey of athletes. There was a strong consensus that fairness and safety in the female category required clear, science-based eligibility rules, and that protecting the female category is a common priority, the IOC said in a statement. There has been vehement backlash, however, from a very potent alliance of trans, gay, legal, medical, and civil rights organizations. Don't trust the rigorous science, some claim. Don't trust the reactionary political underpinning, warn others. There's no doubt the push to exclude trans women was propelled by U.S. President Donald Trump, and an order compelling U.S. consular officials around the world to deny visas for trans athletes competing in L.A. On her A Touch More podcast last Friday, former American women's soccer star Megan Rapinoe, a gay icon, slammed the IOC and its total acquiescence to Trump, calling the changes hateful and horrible. We already know that biology, as much as we want it to be just nice and clean and tight and perfectly in one category and others, it's not. So now what we're doing is subjecting everybody, all women and all people who are identifying as women, to this really invasive testing that to me just says, like, oh, so we're just trying to whittle it down to ascertain type of woman and to a certain type of woman. This committee is framing it as based in science, which it's not. Actually, it is, though some refute the evidence. And people like Rapinoe, defending the rights of trans athletes, have negligible concern for what had been an awfully unfair playing field for cis females. The test isn't invasive, it's a swab. The preponderance of evidence shows a clear advantage for athletes designated male at birth. And similar rules, 28 U.S. states have passed legislation barring trans athletes in school sports, not and don't apply to recreational sports or pre-puberty sports competition. This isn't about broadly denying trans athletes their civil rights in any other area of life, which would be insupportable. It's a specific exclusion very much based on safeguarding competitive spaces for women and girls. Further, the trend in that direction long preceded anything Trump had to say about it. Likely, the IOC policy will be challenged at the Court of Arbitration for Sport in Lausanne, possibly by an athlete acting alone. However, that court rules the pendulum of Saturday and public opinion won't swing back. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Left to Their Own Devices explores effects of social media and technology on youth. The Toronto Star's podcast, Left to Their Own Devices, is a finalist for a prestigious Peabody Award, one of the highest international honors in journalism. Left to Their Own Devices is a 10-part investigative podcast that explores the profound impact of social media and technology on youth. The Star partnered with Paradigms and the Center for Media, Technology, and Democracy at McGill University on this series, which investigates how social media algorithms fuel obsessive use and addiction, push children towards self-harm, dieting content, and violent pornography at younger ages. We created Left to Their Own Devices to shine a light on the experiences of young people online, said Ava Smithing, host of Left to Their Own Devices. We believe these stories deserve to be heard, and more importantly, to be believed. A Peabody nomination validates our work and recognizes the gravity of the harm these platforms inflict on young people. This recognition makes our team's work in the fight for safer online communication. The podcast also documents the explosion of online exploitation, including the financial extortion of minors, that has led to dozens of teen suicides since 2021. The series includes original investigative reporting and interviews with affected youth, parents who have lost children, addiction experts, neuroscientists, and lawyers suing some of the world's leading social media companies. It also explores solutions led by young people demanding change. The Peabody Award nomination is a huge honor for our team, who continue to fearlessly report on the profound impact social media has on young people and children, said Nicole McIntyre, editor-in-chief of the Toronto Star. Left to Their Own Devices investigates the powerful corporations behind social media platforms, their algorithms, and reveals devastating harm. This is a public service journalism for an entire generation. The Star podcast received the Peabody Award nomination by a unanimous vote from its board of jurors. The awards were originally created as the radio industry's equivalent of the Pulitzer Prizes, then expanded to broadcast television and eventually digital media. The final winners from all categories of the Peabody Award will be announced on April 23rd. The 86th Annual Peabody Awards ceremony is May 31st. On the day of the nomination, the Star released a new episode of Left to Their Own Devices. The episode features a conversation that took place March 31st at Columbia University between Smithing and Jonathan Haidt, author of Anxious Generation: How the Great Rewiring of Childhood is Causing an Epidemic of Mental Illness. Reading from the Toronto Star, Courts. Woman on trial in death of mother, 96, says she was petrified of hospital. Ebba Simonis testified Tuesday that she had compelling reasons for letting her 96-year-old mother spend 2 nights and 3 days naked on the floor of her cluttered and filthy Broadview Avenue home. The 73-year-old Toronto woman told court she didn't dial the emergency number sooner because her mother was petrified of being taken to the hospital and would become extremely agitated, even yelling at the mere suggestion. She didn't want to go and die there, said the retired University Health Network clerical worker. Simonis was testifying in her own defense at the downtown Toronto courthouse in front of Superior Court Justice Jane Kelly. Simonis has pleaded not guilty to failing to provide the necessaries of life, criminal negligence causing death, and unlawfully killing her mother by failing to provide the necessaries of life between January 4th and January 6th, 2024. Kelly's presiding over the trial without a jury. Simonis says she also firmly believed, at least in the beginning, that her mom, Vasiliki Atanasovsky, wasn't injured or distressed, and that she would get up off the floor, as she had many times in the past. You knew that you needed to call an ambulance, Crown Attorney Christine Jenkins asked pointedly. Disagree, replied the petite, gray-haired woman. She wasn't in despair. Simonis is representing herself at trial, but a court-appointed amicus curiae questioned her on Tuesday. Lawyer Erin Wine asked her to explain how she came to be the primary caregiver of her elderly mother, who started showing signs of dementia around the time she fell and fractured her hip in 2017. She said her only sibling, a brother, declined to help, citing back problems, so she was solely responsible for her mother's care. She tried to get her into a long-term care home for Greek-speaking people. Her mother spoke little English, but was told there was a lengthy waiting list. Simonis described her mother's increasing confusion and hoarding, and how, when she tried repeatedly to clean and manage her mother's belongings, she faced resistance and even physical aggression. She'd hit me with a stick, Simonis said. Retired after working 40 years, she explained how she moved into her mother's home on Broadview Avenue around the time of the COVID-19 pandemic hit in 2020. On January 4th, 2024, her mother slid off the sofa in the living room. Simonis said she wasn't alarmed. In Greece, they always sat on the floor, and her mother told her she was fine. She was singing and watching TV, and I knew eventually she would get up. She tried repeatedly to lift her up, clean her and feed her, replacing cushions and changing her as best she could. Simonis begged her brother on the phone to come over and assist, but he declined. A family friend came over, but felt it was too dangerous to lift her. Her mother, whom she covered with a blanket, also told him to go home, she said. She went outside and asked a neighbor to help, but once inside, he changed his mind when he saw the woman's frail condition. All 3 men advised her to call 911. Wine noted later that none of them took that step themselves. On the morning of January 6th, Simonis noticed her mother's arm was cold, her speech impaired, and her knee swollen. That's when I started to panic and called 911. She said she did not know about the ulcer sore on her mother's back until after she died in the hospital. During cross-examination, Jenkins asked Simonis about the state of the home, casting into courtroom monitors photos of the interior. Part of the ceiling caved in, the front doorknob was missing, and there were bags of clothing everywhere. The bathroom and kitchen were filled with clutter and filthy, not a safe place for a 96-year-old woman to live, Jenkins stated. Simonis said it was difficult to clean because her mother wanted me to be beside her all the time. She said she often bought hot meals at Sobeys or cooked food in the microwave as the stove didn't work. There was a flood in the basement that had led her to bring some of the bags of clothing to the main floor, contributing to the chaos. After she finished testifying, Simonis told the judge she would not be calling any other witnesses. Closing arguments are Friday. Some foreign officials fleeing police probes. Ottawa. Almost a third of police probes involving members of foreign diplomatic missions in Canada in the last 5 years saw the subjects of the investigations leave the country before charges were laid or prosecuted. Documents obtained by the Canadian press through an access to information request list 67 incidents involving members of foreign missions that required police involvement between September 1st, 2020 and December 31st, 2025. In 22 of those cases, the subject of the criminal probe left Canada before charges were laid or before the court process was completed. 9 of those incidents included allegations of impaired driving, the most common offense where the suspect or accused left before the legal process could be completed. The 22 cases also include 4 incidents of sexual assault, 3 involving domestic violence, and several involved serious traffic offenses such as stunt driving and driving on a suspended license. One incident involves the adult child of a consular official being arrested on multiple warrants linked to human trafficking allegations in 2 provinces. Documents say charges were laid and that a court date was set, but the home state recalled the suspect before court proceedings began. The names of those countries where mission members were subjects of investigations are redacted in the documents, and specific dates and locations of the incidents are not included. There are cases where the legal process regularly proceeds. This includes a dependent of a foreign representative with diplomatic immunity pleading guilty to possessing child pornography. A sentence is not mentioned, but the documents note the individual is no longer in Canada. Newcomers more likely overqualified for jobs, study finds. Data spurs concern over how Canada is making use of talent. Newcomers are much more likely than Canadian-born workers to be stuck in jobs below their qualifications, according to the Statistics Canada data published Tuesday. Nearly 1/3 to 32% of recent immigrants, those admitted as permanent residents within the past 5 years, aged 25 to 54, with post-secondary education, reported being overqualified for their jobs, compared with 19% of Canadian-born workers of the same age, according to labor force survey data collected in September 2024 and September 2025. Nearly 21% of newcomers with post-secondary credentials were also more likely to be in a job that was not related to their field of study, compared with 15% of Canadian-born individuals. The gap persists even among workers with the same level of education. 33% of newcomers with a degree above a bachelor's reported being overqualified, compared with nearly 20% of Canadian-born workers with the same qualifications. There were signs of improvement on the employment front in a separate Statistics Canada study. The survey covered 2019 to 2024 and reported that 42% of recent immigrants secured a job or started a business within 3 months of arrival, up from 31% in earlier cohorts who had arrived 10 to 15 years earlier. The findings come as Ottawa plans to drastically scale back immigration levels over the next 3 years, while focusing on attracting and retaining highly skilled immigrants. The new data raises questions about how effectively Canada is using the talent that is already here. Canada's objective is to attract and retain the most qualified, educated, and skilled immigrants, but in the labor market, they're not getting the jobs they're trained for, said Marsha Akbar, research lead on labor migration at Toronto Metropolitan University. The policy objective and the reality are not matching. There's a big gap. As new entrants to the Canadian labor market, recent immigrants often struggle to find work that matches their education, training, and skills. Part of this is the result of discrimination in the labor market and a lack of recognition of credentials. Immigrants are selected for permanent residence at the federal level based on criteria including education and experience, but once they arrive, those same qualifications can go unrecognized at the provincial level. The result is a system that still underutilizes skilled immigrants, leaving many in precarious work despite critical labor shortages and an aging population, and is estimated to cost Canada $50 billion in lost GDP each year. Newcomers with degrees from countries that are members of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, which includes Australia, France, Germany, and the U.S., were far less likely to face job mismatch than those educated elsewhere. More than 27% of recent immigrants with non-OECD bachelor degrees or higher were in low-skilled jobs compared with 14% of those with OECD degrees, according to the data. When newcomers experience desk killing, they end up turning to survival jobs. And that's when we see the mismatch between levels of education and occupation, Akbar said. From the healthcare section of the Toronto Star, Ozempic's price has some seeking generic options. Health Canada reviewing 9 new alternatives to costly GLP-1 drug prescribed to treat obesity. Anne Welsh worked a physically demanding job at her local SPCA, lifting pets, cleaning kennels, and walking dogs, until she retired at age 71. With the loss of that physical activity, coupled with an underactive thyroid, the weight just started piling on, the now 77-year-old said from her home in Paris, Ontario. I'm definitely feeling very down at times because I try so hard, and I'll go for a few weeks and I won't eat any sweets and I'll try to eat salads, and then all of a sudden I wake up one morning and all I can think about is eating sweets. I'm sure that my back issues and my other issues would be helped by me being able to lose weight. Welsh asked her doctor if Ozempic was an option. She said her doctor told her the GLP-1 medication would be helpful, and she was more than happy to prescribe it for me. But because Welsh doesn't have diabetes, the Health Canada approved condition for which Ozempic is prescribed, the Ontario Drug Benefit Program that covers medications for seniors 65 and older doesn't fund it. That's in line with public drug plans across the country, according to the Canadian Institute for Health Information. Living on a fixed income of the Canada Pension Plan and Old Age Security, Welsh said she can't afford to pay for the drug, which often costs a few $100s a month out of pocket. It's very frustrating, she said, because she's watched her husband lose 30 to 40 pounds on Ozempic and keep it off. He got coverage from the provincial drug program because he has a diagnosis of diabetes. Welsh is hoping one of the 9 generic semaglutide drugs, the active ingredient in Ozempic, currently under review by Health Canada, will soon be approved. Generic semaglutide would be cheaper than brand name Ozempic, but how much depends on how many generic options are approved and hit the market, said Mina Tadros, a pharmaceutical policy expert at the University of Toronto. According to the pricing structure of the Pan-Canadian Pharmaceutical Alliance, the first generic medication could cost 75 to 85% of the brand name. Once a second medication enters the market, the price for both drops to 50%. When there are 3 or more generic products available in Canada, the cost would decrease to about 35% of brand name Ozempic's price. Welsh isn't sure if that will bring the cost down low enough for her to afford, but she's willing to try. Probably if it was under $150, I could barely squeeze by, but I could probably cut corners in a few places. Ozempic has become the largest single medication to drive up public prescription medication spending, accounting for $807 million of the total $20.1 billion spent in public drug systems across Canada, according to data released by the Canadian Institute for Health Information in March. Dr. Pegah Podar, an endocrinologist and an assistant clinical professor at McMaster University in Hamilton, said cost is the biggest barrier for patients who don't have diabetes but need GLP-1 medications for obesity treatment. A lot of the generics conversation is actually coming from us as healthcare providers to say, hey, we know that this isn't an option for you right now because of cost, but it will likely be an option for you very soon because of the generics and the hopefulness around reduction in cost. The Canadian Press reached out to Health Canada for an update on when the first semaglutide generics might be approved. Spokesperson Marie-Pierre Burrell said the agency is on track to meet review targets for generic semaglutide drug submissions, noting that the initial review timeline is about 6 months. But that doesn't include the time needed for companies to address Health Canada requests for additional data. Cost is also a barrier for patients with diabetes who need Ozempic but aren't seniors and don't have private insurance. One of them, Brenda Rogers, is hoping generic semaglutide will be available in Canada by this summer. But she's not feeling optimistic. The 53-year-old online business manager in Vancouver is rationing her last doses of Mounjaro, a rival GLP-1 medication manufactured by Eli Lilly, now that she no longer has a drug benefit plan since losing her job in December. My body is adjusting to the lower dose. It's not ideal, as I'm noticing increased hunger, but I'm happy to still have some medication. I will last longer this way, said Rogers, who has diabetes and has struggled with her weight. Both Ozempic, which she started taking a couple of years ago while in a previous job with drug coverage, and Mounjaro have been life-changing in conjunction with diet and exercise changes, she said. I was now sleeping better, I was eating better, I was able to move better, I was thinking better, Rogers said. Her plan is to switch to a generic semaglutide once it's available, hoping the cost will be low enough for her to pay out of pocket. Amazon will charge some sellers on its platform a 3.5% surcharge later this month as the war in Iran drives up oil prices and increases the e-commerce giant's costs. The affected sellers are the critical mass of Amazon's online marketplace independent merchants that sell products through Amazon and also rely on the company for packing and shipping. The fee shows another way the Iran war has affected Amazon. In early March, not long after the U.S. attacked Iran, several of the company's data centers in the Middle East were damaged by Iranian drone strikes. The damage severely impaired connectivity in the region through Amazon Web Services, the company's cloud computing platform. The fuel and logistics surcharge won't apply to all third-party merchants and won't be charged based on an item's price listed on Amazon's site. Rather, sellers who use the company's Fulfillment by Amazon program, a service in which Amazon stores, handles, packs, and ships products, will have the surcharge based on their fulfillment fees starting April 17th. The same surcharge will apply to sellers who use Amazon shipping services but sell on their own sites starting May 2nd. It will only affect items sold and shipped in the US and Canada. Amazon's e-commerce business, which recorded $587 billion in revenue last year, has always been vulnerable to external forces like oil prices and trade policy. Operational costs for Amazon's retail division rose in 2022 as gas prices did, leading the company to tack on a 5% surcharge for third-party sellers at the time. Amazon spokesperson Ashley Vanasek said the company has eaten the cost so far, but similar to other major carriers, when main elevated, we implement temporary surcharges to recover those costs. Vanasek added Amazon's surcharge was meaningfully lower than those applied by other major carriers. FedEx recently implemented a 26.5% surcharge for domestic ground shipments, and UPS imposed a 27% surcharge, the Wall Street Journal reported Friday. Amazon didn't say when the surcharge will end, but the company will continue to evaluate it as the war progresses. Articles and features from the Wednesday, April 8th edition of the Toronto Star. Your reader has been Elizabeth Ortel. Thank you for listening.